About 2 days after surgery, I started to die. There was internal bleeding, and from that, obviously a lot of loss of blood, and my blood pressure dropped really low. And then all my vital signs started to shut down. And I remember opening my eyes and seeing this big belly, and just looking at my belly and not knowing what was going on. My whole body had swollen up. It was all distended. And then the pain became so intense that I started screaming. And as I was screaming, people started running in, in white, pushing carts and machinery and screaming and tossing stuff over me. I remember looking up and they were throwing tubes and bottles back and forth. And then I realized I must be dying, and I was screaming, no, 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 leave me alone, let me die, because it had been 2 years of being sick, and I just didn't want to, live anymore. And I lost consciousness, and the next thing I knew, I was out in the hallway. It was probably the middle of the night, because the lights were dim. I looked back and forth, and I didn't see anybody, and then it hit me that I wasn't supposed to be out in the hall. And I figured if they caught me out in the hall, I'd get into trouble. So I turned around to move back into the room, and then I realized something was really weird, because I was looking into a PA speaker. Now this PA speaker was up near the ceiling, and I was looking directly into it, and I knew when I came into the hospital that speaker was at least 3 feet above my head. So then I knew something was really strange. And I moved back into the room, and I looked down into the circle bed, and I saw my body. It didn't bother me. I was very peaceful. I was very calm. It was okay that she was down there and I was up where I was. The only thing I remember at that point was laughing, because I had tape wrapped around my nose. It was just strange to see my body like that with this tape, and just hanging out with her for a while. It certainly wasn't me anymore. I had no problems with the separation. And then the next thing I knew, I was in total blackness. And I remember thinking, well, either my eyes aren't working or I'm in darkness. And as I thought that, I felt hands come around the back of me and pull me into this warm, soft, lush love, which was my grandmother. She had been dead for 14 years. Now, when she died, I thought that was it. It was over. I never gave much thought to the fact that when people were dead, they were dead. But I also had absolutely no doubt at that moment I was with my grandmother. And as I realized that, I also realized that everything I had ever believed was just a belief, that now I was in touch with reality, and reality was that my grandmother and I were together again. And as I thought that, it was like every memory we had of each other came alive again, and all this love that we had for each other just embraced us and was us. And I stayed with her for a while, and then started moving again through this darkness. And as I looked through this darkness, I could see energy churning. And the energy was moving through the blackness, and light was coming out. And the light was moving down to the end of wherever I was going, and it was forming the light. And I wanted to get to it. I could not only feel the light, I could hear this low droning noise that was beckoning me to the light. But at the same time, my hands were becoming really big. My hands were expanding, and I became fascinated by that. And the next thing I knew, it was morning. I was back in the circle bed. 2 nurses were in my room opening the drapes. And I tried to tell them that I had left the bed, and they told me I had hallucinated. A week later, I had been rotated face down, and that's really uncomfortable, lying on this bed, because there's practically no mattress at all. It's just a suspended canvas, and I only weighed 85 pounds at the time. That's 35 pounds less than I weigh right now. So I was very skinny, and I was very uncomfortable, and the button for the nurse fell away from the bed, so I couldn't hit the button to call the nurse, and the door was closed so nobody could hear me. And I started calling, and then I started screaming, and then I became hysterical. And as I became hysterical, I separated again from my body. I left the bed. This time I was totally alert, and I watched it happen. I watched my body move away in the circle bed, and I looked down. I was back up in the blackness, and I looked down, and my body was in that circle bed, and like a bubble, and crying hysterically. And then I looked out into the blackness, and there was another bubble, and in it was me at about a year old, face down in my crib crying, just as intensely. And I kept looking back and forth between the 2 scenes, because I was, obviously confused. And about the 3rd time I looked back and forth, it hit me. There was a very strong presence of this being that was an energy or a force, certainly not an old man with a long white beard, but an energy that just moved through me and was still it, that was just pure love. If you took the love I felt for my grandmother and you multiplied it by about 1,000,000, maybe that you could get the intensity of this love. It was very warm and very, it held me up. And as I realized that, I had been an atheist until that moment, but as I realized that, then the baby in the crib became the center of a cloud of bubbles, and in the cloud of bubbles, in each bubble there was another scene from my life. And together, this being and I bounced through all these bubbles, and I re-experienced my life. And I re-experienced everything, including what the other people in the bubble experienced too. I mean, I wasn't just re-experiencing it as myself, but I was my mother and my dad and my brother and my boyfriend who went on to become my husband, and then my kids. I was them as well as me. And I could feel the love, and I could feel the negative times too. I could feel everything that was going on. And the first realization I had was that we're not separate beings. We don't end at our skin. We are all connected. We've been zapped into enlightenment for a few seconds, but we come back here and we don't know what to do with it. We had it there. We don't have it here because our significant others, there's that tug of war to go back to being the way you were before. You know, nobody wants to see you change. That's too uncomfortable. So there's that enlightenment, and then there's a tremendous amount of grief for having to give up the light and be back here. And then after the grieving process, there's a search to find it again, only this time here. And eventually you do, but you have to heal yourself. The near-death experience is an initiation, but it's only the beginning. Then there's the search. And I think what I've come to in 16 years of searching is that the universe is benevolent and the universe is meaningful. And we have to heal ourselves enough to be able to see that and live our lives according to that.